So hello, everyone. I'm Ina Hillebrandt, and welcome. These are the further adventures of a book and its author, who are really worth catching. The author is right here. It's Chester L. Richards. Hi there, Chester.
How did you?
Good to see you again. And everybody, we're talking about his book, From the Potato to Star Trek and Beyond. And we're going to take you behind the scenes of the story in the book that's called Star Trek. So Chester, tell us about
Take it away. Take it away. Okay.
Take it away.
Well, this is an adventure that I had when I was a graduate student. And I hooked up professionally with my colleague, Judy Burns. We had met in school. And she had just graduated from the university. I was still a graduate student at the time. And she had written a speculative script for Star Trek for the second season, but then Star Trek didn't pick up her script and it went off the air. So Judy had to work with other people in getting Star Trek back on the air. Now, if you know the television situation in that period of history, no program that had ever been canceled was ever put back on the air. Star Trek was the very first that actually was able to resume for one more year, the third season of the original Star Trek. Mm-hmm. So Judy and I really hadn't watched Star Trek. I had watched very little television because I was busy with my studies at the time. So Judy sat me down and played a bunch of videotapes to get me acquainted with Star Trek. And I thought it was a very interesting program. And it apparently got into me because I went to sleep one night and I had a dream. And in the dream, I was on the bridge of the Enterprise. And there was a ghost that was haunting the bridge of the Enterprise. And it woke me up. I mean, you do pay attention when a ghost is haunting you. So I actually made a note and I said, well, I'll call Judy in the morning and see what she thinks of the idea, which I did. Went back to sleep, called her in the morning, and she thought it was a terrific idea for a story. So she offered to have me collaborate with her on doing a speculative story and script, see if we could peddle that to Star Trek. So we started working on that. In the meantime, Judy was taking a university extension course on script writing, so she was learning the trade as well. She was a good storyteller, but there's a lot of technical stuff involved in writing scripts, so she was learning that trade. And her teacher in that course was a guy named Bob Duncan, and Bob Duncan was a really interesting character. He had written dozens of novels, maybe 100 screenplays, both for television and for the movies. He was a real old pro. And an amazing writer. I was privileged to be able to audit that class, and just watched how he could take a situation and turn it into a work of art. He really was enormously gifted in doing that. And at the end of the course, he had a party at his house, and Bob and I were off in the corner talking, and he was a little bit amused at the fact that I was not intending to be a professional writer. I was in fact an engineer. And he wondered what was an engineer doing taking the course, or at least auditing the course. Yeah. So he was really fascinated with the subject. Yeah. Judy wandered over at that point, and Bob said, you guys wrote this really neat Star Trek script. And he says, that's a really good story. He says, whatever happened to that? And Judy says, well, they had a reorganization at Star Trek, and they had got a new producer and, new staff and all the rest of that stuff. And Bob said, well, who's the new producer? And Judy says, it's some guy named Fred Freiberger. And Bob says, I've known Freddie. I've known Freddie for years and years and years. We used to do all kinds of TV stuff together. We did Wild Wild West together and things like. He says, I'll call Freddie in the morning and get him to read your script, which he did. Mm-hmm. So Judy and I went up to Hollywood to see the early showing of 2001. And as we were driving back, discussing things, we drove back to Orange County where we both were living. And Judy got back to her house, and her sister came running out of the house. She was living at home at the time. Sister comes running out of the house and says, this guy, Ned, Fred Freeman, Fred something or other, been calling all evening long. He says to call him immediately as soon as you get back. And Judy says, was that Fred Freiberger? And her sister said, yeah, that's the name. So Judy called the phone number that was given, and indeed it was the producer of Star Trek. And he wanted us up for a meeting first thing the next morning. So we got up nice and early and drove up and had to talk our way past the guard at the gate and into the Star Trek offices. And that's where we had our first meeting with the senior people, Fred Freiberger and Bob Justman, and the story editor as well. And they told us, we like your script, we're gonna buy it. What a thrill. I got to tell you, it's an amazing thing. And then Bob
and you guys are kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're students,
right.
Recently graduated and also a student.
Yeah.
And Bobby Justman, who was the real brains behind the organization at that point, the associate producer, he said, there's just some minor changes we want to make. No big deal. It's easy for you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so he started listing the changes, and I won't go into the details because that's written up in the story. But basically, he just totally shredded the story. It just threw it out the window. We were able to salvage little bits and pieces of the original story.
Mm-hmm.
And then to drive the knife even deeper, he says, we have to have the revised story and the revised script by next Friday. So we had a week to do it. We had to write.
Terrific.
We had to go essentially almost from scratch and write a whole new Star Trek script.
Mm-hmm.
And we succeeded. We got it done. We had a much better story, as it turned out. And because we had learned a lot doing the first episode, the first version of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to correct a lot of problems that were in the first version and came up with a completely new story with some of the same elements. And we got it done, and we were able to get it to them the next Friday, and they bought it and went into production with, substantial changes along the way after that, and eventually went on the air. And what a thrill for Judy and I and her family and all her friends from the neighborhood to sit there watching this thing on television, throwing popcorn at the TV screen, and just generally enjoying a great party.
I'll bet. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. There are some fun details in there in the written version of this. One of the things that I found fascinating was all that went into creating the Tholian Web, which is what this story was, this episode. And you talk about that, about how that was created. So fascinating stuff.
Well, and it turned out to be one of the premium shows from the first 3 years. It's in the top 10. That's what the people who follow Star Trek, the Trekkies, that's how they rank it. I don't think it's ranked anywhere near the top of the 10, but it's in the top 10, and that's good. That's good enough for me as far as I'm concerned.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Well, thank you so much. The Adventures of a Trek Convert. I don't know. But
I've followed it enough to understand but I'm not diehard. Let me put it that way.
Uh-huh.
I enjoy the series.
Yeah, and there's new stuff that's happening now too, which is fun. Well, all right. And your former partner is involved in that.
Oh yeah. Let me mention that Judy Burns went from there.
Mm-hmm.
She got a job as a staff writer for Mission Impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And from Mission Impossible, she became story editor on most of the Star Trek movies, the early Star Trek movies.
Mm-hmm.
Had a major rewrite of Wrath of Khan. That was basically Judy under a pen name. And went on from there to become a story editor and producer of a number of very successful TV shows.
Mhm.
And then the final thing was she was a co-producer of MacGyver.
Mhm.
And basically, as far as I can tell, she originated the MacGyver concept in the series.
Hmm.
And so pretty much everybody's familiar with MacGyver.
Yeah,
It's deep
absolutely.
in the culture at this point. But that's
Sure.
Judy Burns.
Sure.
She was
She's
producer
a-
of that series.
She's a brilliant writer. She really is. Very, very fine. And storyteller, as you
Yeah,
said.
a great
Yeah.
storyteller.
Mhm.
Really,
Yeah.
really. I learned so much from her.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hats off to Judy and hats off to you. Thank you so much for sharing this story with us, and to be continued. Take good care. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.